The crack in the marble was barely visible. No wider than a strand of hair, it ran diagonally across one of the floor tiles, just inside the revolving door of the Meridian Grand Ashford, a hairline fracture that 99% of guests would never notice. But Vanessa Caldwell noticed. She always noticed. She paused just inside the entrance, her rolling suitcase coming to a stop beside her, one hand still resting on its leather handle. Her husband, Derek, 2 steps behind her, nearly walked into her back. "Ness?" He adjusted the garment bag slung over his shoulder. "Everything okay?" "Tile," she said quietly, her eyes tracing the crack. "Lobby floor, section 3. Derek followed her gaze, squinted, then shook his head with a soft laugh. "We've been driving for 6 hours, and you're already doing inspections." She smiled, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes because her mind was already cataloging. The crack, the slightly wilted orchid in the centerpiece, arrangement on the concierge desk, the fingerprint smudge on the brass elevator surround. Small things. But Vanessa had built her entire life on the principle that small things were never small. It was the evening of October 11th, a Friday. The Blue Ridge Mountains had already begun their annual transformation, the trees outside the hotel's floor-to-ceiling windows blazing in copper and rust. The Meridian Grand Ashford sat on 12 acres of manicured grounds just outside the town of Ashford, Virginia, a luxury property with 186 rooms, a Michelin-adjacent restaurant, and a spa that had been featured in Condé Nast Traveler 3 years running. It was also the crown jewel of Meridian Hotels, a boutique chain of 23 properties scattered across the eastern seaboard, each one carefully curated to reflect the character of its location, while maintaining the brand's signature standard. Warmth without pretension, luxury without exclusion. Vanessa Caldwell owned every single one of them. The path from where she'd started to where she stood now was not a straight line. It was a 23-year climb that had begun in a different hotel entirely, a mid-range Marriott property in Richmond, Virginia, where a 19-year-old Vanessa Okafor had pushed a housekeeping cart down carpeted hallways at 6 in the morning, stripping beds and scrubbing bathrooms for $8.75 an hour. She'd been a sophomore at Virginia Commonwealth University at the time, working 35 hours a week to cover the gap between her financial aid and the actual cost of being alive. Her mother, Grace, a home health aide who'd raised 3 children alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in Church Hill, had told her, "Baby, when you clean someone's room, you learn what they value. And when you learn what people value, you can build something they'll pay for." Vanessa had taken that literally. She studied the guests. She noticed which amenities they used and which they ignored. She noticed which complaints appeared on the comment cards and which ones guests were too polite to write down, but mentioned a housekeeping staff in passing. The hallway noise, the slow elevator, the soap that dried out their skin. She kept a notebook, a small green spiral-bound thing that she filled with observations, sketches of room layouts, and ideas for how things could be better. By 24, she'd been promoted to front desk. By 27, she was an assistant manager. By 30, she'd earned her MBA from Georgetown, night classes, 18 months of 4-hour sleep, and landed a position as director of operations for a regional hotel group based in Charlotte. At 34, she'd negotiated the acquisition of 3 underperforming boutique properties in Virginia, using a combination of SBA loans, private investors, and a business plan so detailed that the lead banker at First National had called it the most thorough proposal I've seen in 20 years. She rebranded them as Meridian Hotels, built a team of people who shared her vision and expanded, carefully, methodically, one property at a time, each one restored and reimagined. Now, at 42, she presided over 23 properties, $340 million in annual revenue, and a workforce of over 2,600 employees. Forbes had profiled her twice. The American Hotel and Lodging Association had awarded her their Diversity Leadership Prize. She'd turned down 2 acquisition offers from major hospitality chains because she didn't want Meridian to become a line item in someone else's portfolio. She wanted every property to carry the philosophy she'd absorbed, pushing that housekeeping cart in Richmond. See the guest, not their clothes, not their car. The guest. Derek, her husband, understood this about her. He was 44, a pediatric surgeon at Virginia Children's Medical Center, a man who saved children's lives with steady hands and who could never, in 15 years of marriage, remember where he'd left his car keys. He was her opposite in temperament, warm where she was measured, spontaneous where she was strategic, and her equal in the thing that mattered most. He believed, as she did, that dignity was not a luxury amenity. But tonight, she wasn't here as the owner. Tonight, she was just a woman checking in with her husband to celebrate their 15th wedding anniversary. No advance calls, no VIP flags in the reservation system, no entourage. Just a booking made online under her maiden name, Vanessa Okafor, with a standard king suite and a 7:30 dinner reservation at the hotel's restaurant, Copper and Vine. This was tradition. Every year on their anniversary, Vanessa and Derek picked a different Meridian property and checked in anonymously. It had started as a romantic gesture, a chance to experience their own hotels the way a guest would. Over time, it had also become the most honest quality audit Vanessa could conduct. No one performed when they didn't know. The owner was watching. What none of the staff at the Meridian Grand Ashford knew, what no one behind that polished reception desk had any reason to suspect, was that the woman in the olive green travel coat with the small gold hoops and the natural hair twisted into a low bun was about to change everything about how this hotel operated. 12 feet away behind the curved mahogany reception desk, Patricia Langford was having a night. The general manager of the Meridian Grand Ashford stood with her back to the lobby, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice low and clipped. The call was with the regional wine distributor, who had just informed her that the 3 cases of 2019 Chateau Margaux she'd ordered for Saturday's private tasting event had been redirected to another property due to a billing discrepancy. Redirected, Patricia repeated, her jaw tightening. You mean someone else got my wine? She was 41, tall, with ash blonde hair pulled into a precise chignon. She wore a fitted navy blazer with the hotel's gold pin on the lapel, a small M enclosed in a laurel wreath. Patricia had been the GM at the Ashford property for 26 months, and in that time she had driven occupancy from 74% to 89%, increased ancillary revenue by 22%, and earned the property its first ever mention in Forbes' travel guide. She was, by every quantifiable metric, excellent at her job. The metrics did not capture everything. Patricia had grown up in Fairfax County, a comfortable suburb where comfort was the point. Her father managed a commercial real estate firm. Her mother chaired the school board. She'd attended the University of Virginia, majored in hospitality management, and built a career on competence and control. She could diagnose a plumbing issue from the sound of a pipe, recite occupancy projections from memory, and manage a dining room during a 200-person wedding reception without breaking a sweat. What Patricia could not do, what she had never been required to do in Fairfax County or at UVA or in any of the 4 properties she'd managed before the Ashford, was examine the invisible calculus that ran beneath her competence. The quick mental arithmetic she performed every time a guest walked through the door. Do they belong here? Can they afford this? Will they cause a problem? It was an equation she applied to everyone, she would have said. But the variables were not equally weighted, and the outcomes were not equally distributed. She didn't know this about herself. That was the most honest thing you could say about Patricia Langford. She genuinely did not know, and the structures around her had never given her a reason to find out. Patricia ended the call with a curt, "Fix it by noon tomorrow or I'm switching distributors," and turned back toward the lobby. Her heels clicked against the marble, the same marble with the hairline crack that Vanessa had clocked 30 seconds earlier, and her eyes swept the space with the practiced gaze of someone who managed by sight. Friday evening, check-in rush winding down. The lobby was half full, a cluster of women in their 50s settling into the lounge chairs near the fireplace. Clearly a girls' trip, a young couple with matching North Face jackets studying a trail map, a silver-haired man reading the Financial Times by the window. And at the front desk, waiting to check in, a black couple. Patricia's gaze lingered for a fraction of a second longer than it should have. She would later insist, to HR, to the attorneys, to the regional director, that what happened next had nothing to do with race. She would say it was about presentation and security protocols and maintaining brand standards. She would say these things with conviction because Patricia Langford genuinely believed them. That was, in many ways, the most dangerous part. Vanessa and Derek approached the reception desk together. The front desk agent, a young man named Ellis, mid-20s, with a name tag that read Ellis, front desk associate, looked up and offered a smile that was genuine if slightly harried. "Good evening. Welcome to the Meridian Grand Ashford. Checking in?" "We are," Vanessa said, setting her ID and credit card on the counter. "Reservation under Okafor, Okafor." Ellis typed the name, nodded. "I see it here. King Suite, 2 nights, with a dinner reservation at Copper and Vine tonight at 7:30. That's the one." Derek leaned an elbow on the counter. "Any chance we can get a late checkout on Sunday? We're not in any rush." "I can make a note and confirm in the morning, depending on occupancy," Ellis said. "But Sundays are usually pretty flexible." It was going smoothly. Ellis processed the card, encoded the room keys, and was reaching for a welcome packet when Patricia appeared at his shoulder. "Ellis?" Her voice was pleasant, managerial pleasant. "I'll take it from here." Ellis glanced at her, surprised. In 26 months, Patricia had never personally handled a standard check-in. She managed. She didn't clerk. "It's fine, Ms. Langford. I've got—" "I said I'll take it." The smile stayed fixed, but the temperature dropped 2 degrees. Ellis stepped back. Patricia positioned herself behind the terminal and looked at the screen, then at Vanessa, then at Derek. She studied them the way she studied a room before a VIP arrival, assessing, categorizing. Vanessa wore olive green cotton twill travel coat, dark jeans, and white sneakers. No visible designer labels. Her suitcase was a weathered Rimowa, real but not new. Derek wore a charcoal pullover, khakis, and driving shoes. His watch was a vintage Omega Seamaster, a gift from his father on the day he completed his surgical residency, but it was the kind of understated piece that only another watch person would recognize. They looked, in other words, like a comfortable couple on a weekend trip. Not flashy, not performing wealth. Patricia closed the reservation screen and opened a new one. "I'm sorry," she said, her smile still perfectly calibrated. "There seems to be an issue with this reservation." Vanessa's expression didn't change. "What kind of issue?" "The system is showing a hold on the card. It hasn't fully authorized." Patricia tapped the keyboard with a single manicured finger, though she hadn't actually run any new transaction. "This happens occasionally with certain card types. Do you have an alternative form of payment?" Derek straightened. "Certain card types? Some banks have stricter hold policies for luxury properties. It's nothing personal." Patricia folded her hands on the counter. "Do you have another card, or perhaps we can take a cash deposit? The nightly rate for the King Suite is $687 plus tax." She said the number the way some people say the price of a bottle of wine, not as information, but as a test. Vanessa felt the shift. She'd felt it 1,000 times before, in boardrooms, in country clubs, in the first-class lounges of airports where someone's eyes would linger a beat too long on her boarding pass, as if confirming she hadn't wandered in by mistake. The shift from welcome to prove it. The invisible gate that swung shut so quietly that most bystanders never heard it close. She reached into her bag and placed a second card on the counter. A Visa Infinite, black, the kind of card with no preset limit. "Try this one," she said evenly. Patricia glanced at the card, then back at the screen. She typed for a moment, waited, and then shook her head. "I'm afraid this one is also declining." It was a lie. Vanessa knew it was a lie because that card was linked to an account with a 7-figure balance, and it had been used to purchase a $42,000 piece of medical equipment for Derek's practice 3 days earlier without so much as a notification. The card did not decline. Cards like that did not decline. But Vanessa didn't say that, not yet. Because Vanessa Caldwell had spent 23 years in the hospitality industry, and she understood something that most people didn't. The reveal is only as powerful as the patience that precedes it. Derek, however, was a surgeon, not a strategist. His patience was calibrated for operating rooms, not for this. "Run it again," he said. His voice was calm but flat, the voice he used when a scrub nurse handed him the wrong instrument, controlled, warning. "Sir, I've run it twice. I don't want to trigger a fraud alert on your account." "You won't. Run it again." Patricia's eyes moved briefly to the lobby, scanning for other guests who might be observing, and her smile dimmed by exactly 1 watt. "I understand this is frustrating, but I do have a responsibility to ensure that all reservations are properly secured. Perhaps you'd like to step aside and contact your bank. I can hold the reservation for 20 minutes. "Step aside," Derek repeated. He looked at Vanessa. Vanessa placed her hand lightly on his forearm. A small gesture. Steady. "We're not stepping aside," Vanessa said. She kept her voice at the same conversational volume it had been since she walked in. "My reservation is confirmed. My card is valid. I'd like our room keys, please." Patricia straightened to her full height, 5'9" in heels. "Ma'am, I'm the general manager of this hotel, and I'm telling you there is a system issue. I'm not able to check you into a suite until the payment clears. That's policy." "Whose policy?" "Meridian Hotel's policy." Vanessa almost smiled. "Almost. I see. And where exactly in the Meridian Hotel's guest services manual does it say that a general manager should personally intervene in a standard check-in to repeatedly decline a valid payment method?" The question landed like a chess piece placed with deliberate precision. Patricia blinked. "I'm following procedure." "You're following something," Vanessa said quietly. "But it isn't procedure." The lobby had grown quiet, not silent. The fireplace still crackled. The jazz still played from the recessed speakers. The women by the lounge chairs still murmured. But the energy had shifted. The invisible current that runs through any public space when something real is happening had pulled the attention of everyone within earshot. Ellis stood 3 feet behind Patricia, his hands clasped, his expression caught between discomfort and something that looked like recognition, the look of someone who had seen this before and never known what to do about it. He thought about the couple 3 months ago, a black family of 4, the father wearing a Howard University sweatshirt, who'd been asked for 2 forms of ID when the standard was 1. He'd said nothing then. The memory sat in his chest like a stone. The concierge, a woman named Deborah, had stopped arranging brochures. The bellhop near the elevator bay had paused, mid-stride. And by the windows, a man named Gerald Ashby, 72, retired appellate judge, a regular guest who stayed at the Ashford property 4 times a year, had lowered his Financial Times and was watching with the sharp, quiet attention of someone who had spent 40 years evaluating evidence. Patricia felt the attention. She didn't like it. In her experience, scenes were bad for business, and the fastest way to end a scene was to remove the source. "I'm going to have to ask you to wait in the lounge while we resolve this." She gestured toward the seating area near the fireplace. "I'll have someone bring you coffee." "We don't want coffee," Derek said. "We want our room. And I've explained that I can't provide that until the payment clears." "The payment has cleared," Vanessa said. "Your system isn't the problem. You are." Patricia's composure cracked. Just barely, just for a moment, like a hairline fracture in marble. Her nostrils flared. Her chin lifted, a centimeter. "Ma'am, I have been nothing but professional." "You have been nothing but obstructive, and I've been patient. But my patience isn't infinite." Vanessa reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. She opened an app, tapped 3 times, and turned the screen toward Patricia. On it was the Meridian Hotel's internal management dashboard, the one that only property-level GMs and above could access. It showed the Ashford property's real-time occupancy, 91%. Revenue per available room, $412. Guest satisfaction score, 87.3. Staff turnover rate, 31%. That last number was circled in red. Patricia stared at the screen. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. 31% staff turnover, Vanessa said. That's nearly double the Meridian average. I've been curious about why. Now I'm starting to understand. The lobby was fully silent now. Even the jazz seemed to have faded. What happened next would be discussed by the staff of the Meridian Grand Ashford for years. It would become, in the retelling, something close to legend. Who are you?" Patricia's voice had lost its managerial timbre. It was smaller now, uncertain. "My name is Vanessa Caldwell." She said it the way she said everything, without performance, without theater, as if stating a fact no more remarkable than the weather. "My maiden name is Okafor, which is the name on tonight's reservation. I'm the founder and CEO of Meridian Hotels. Every property, every tile, every welcome mat." She paused. "Including the cracked one in your lobby that I noticed when I walked in." The silence that followed was not empty. It was dense, loaded with the sound of assumptions collapsing. Ellis, behind the desk, exhaled audibly. Deborah, at the concierge station, put her hand over her mouth. Gerald Ashby, the retired judge, folded his newspaper neatly and placed it on the table beside him, as though clearing space for what came next. Patricia's face underwent a transformation that lasted approximately 4 seconds and contained multitudes. Shock, recognition, denial. And then, the one Vanessa had seen more times than she could count, the scramble. "Mrs. Caldwell, I had no idea. Of course, I'm so sorry. If I'd known—" "That's exactly the point." Vanessa's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You would have handed me the keys immediately if you'd known. You would have upgraded me to the penthouse. You would have sent champagne and a handwritten note. Because that's what you do for people you think matter. The question, the only question that matters, is what you do for people you think don't." Derek said nothing. He didn't need to. He stood beside his wife with his arms folded and watched Patricia Langford reckon with a silence that no amount of "I'm sorry" could fill. The next 90 minutes unfolded with the quiet, methodical precision of a surgical procedure, which was fitting, given that Derek spent his professional life inside operating theaters where every action was documented and every error had consequences. Vanessa did not raise her voice. She did not make threats. She did not call anyone names. What she did was far more effective. She asked questions. She asked Patricia to pull up the check-in logs for the past 6 months. She asked Ellis, gently, without putting him in an uncomfortable position, whether he had ever seen Patricia intervene in a standard check-in before. He hesitated. Then he said yes. Twice. Both times involving guests of color. She asked to see the property's incident reports. She asked about the staff exit interviews, the ones that had contributed to that 31% turnover number. She asked for the guest complaint file. Patricia produced each document with the stiff compliance of someone who understood that refusal was no longer an option. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled up the digital files on the back office terminal. Vanessa noticed. She noticed everything. Each question was specific. Each answer told a story. The log showed that Patricia had flagged payment issues for 14 check-ins over the past year. 11 of those 14 guests were Black or Latino. 3 had filed formal complaints. 1, a cardiologist from Philadelphia named Dr. Warren Ossie, had posted a detailed account on a travel review site that had received over 200 comments. The review had been flagged by Meridian's brand monitoring system 7 months earlier. Vanessa pulled it up on her phone. She'd read it before. It had been one of the reasons the Ashford property was on her audit list this year. But she'd wanted to see it in person first. Wanted to understand whether this was a pattern or an anomaly. Now she knew. 14 flagged check-ins, Vanessa said. She was sitting in one of the leather chairs in the lobby now. Derek beside her. Patricia across from them, perched on the edge of a wingback as though ready to flee. 11 involving guests of color. 3 complaints. 1 public review. And in all 14 cases the payment was ultimately processed without issue. Correct? Patricia nodded. Her face was the color of skim milk. The cards weren't declining, Patricia. They were never declining. You were. There was no malice in Vanessa's voice. That was what made it devastating. She wasn't angry. She was precise. Patricia opened her mouth, and what came out was the speech that people in her position always gave. The one Vanessa had heard variations of in boardrooms and HR meetings and legal depositions for 2 decades. I was trying to protect the brand. We get chargebacks. We get fraud. I was being careful. You were being selective about who you were careful with. Vanessa leaned forward. That's not protection. That's profiling. And it's not just a violation of Meridian's values. It's a violation of federal and state civil rights law. You know that. Patricia's lip trembled. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered behind her eyes that might have been genuine shame. The kind that sits beneath the defensiveness. The kind that only surfaces when there's nowhere left to retreat. I didn't think I was. I know you didn't think you were, Vanessa said, and her voice for the first time softened. Not much, but enough. That's the problem I'm here to fix. Vanessa did not fire Patricia Langford that night. This surprised Derek. It surprised Ellis and Deborah and Gerald Ashby, who had been quietly listening from his chair by the window and who approached Vanessa afterward to say, with the courtly precision of a man who had spent 4 decades on the bench, "That was the most measured exercise of authority I've witnessed outside a courtroom." It surprised Patricia most of all. What Vanessa did instead was more difficult and more lasting. She called an emergency meeting for 8 a.m. the following morning. Every department head, every supervisor, and Patricia. She sat at the head of the hotel's private dining room, the one typically reserved for wedding rehearsals and board dinners, and she laid out the facts without embellishment. The logs, the pattern, the complaints, the review. What had happened the night before? She did not name Patricia directly during the group portion. She didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew. Then she outlined what was going to change. First, the Meridian Grand Ashford would undergo a complete service equity audit conducted by an independent firm specializing in hospitality discrimination. Every process, check-in, restaurant seating, spa booking, concierge interactions, would be examined for patterns of differential treatment. Second, a new chain-wide initiative called Open Door would be piloted at the Ashford property before rolling out across all 23 Meridian hotels. The program included mandatory bias recognition training for all guest-facing staff, a revised check-in protocol that eliminated subjective flag authority from individual managers, and a confidential reporting system for employees who witnessed discriminatory behavior. Third, the mystery guest program, which Meridian had run informally for years, would be formalized and expanded. Teams of auditors reflecting the diversity of Meridian's customer base would conduct unannounced visits quarterly. Results would be tied to management performance reviews. Fourth, Dr. Warren Ossie, the cardiologist whose review had been ignored for 7 months, would receive a personal call from Vanessa, an apology, and a standing invitation. Every guest who had filed a complaint related to discriminatory treatment at the Ashford property would be contacted individually. The room was silent as Vanessa spoke. Not the stunned silence of the lobby the night before, but the attentive silence of people recognizing that something structural was shifting beneath them. I didn't build Meridian hotels to be a place where the welcome depends on what someone looks like when they walk through the door, Vanessa said. I built it because when I was 19 years old, I was a housekeeper at a hotel in Richmond. And the guests who were kindest to me, who remembered my name, who left notes on the pillow, were the ones who saw me. Not my uniform, not my skin. Me. She paused. That's the standard. Not occupancy rates. Not revenue per room. Whether every person who walks through that door feels seen. She turned to Patricia. The room held its breath. Patricia, your metrics are strong. Your operational instincts are real. But your judgment has a blind spot that has caused measurable harm to guests and staff. You have 2 options. Vanessa held up one finger. Resign today with a standard separation package and a neutral reference. She held up a second finger. Stay. Complete the full equity audit process. Participate in every training session, not as a formality, but as a genuine participant. Accept a 6-month probationary review, and prove, through actions, not promises, that you can manage this property in a way that reflects what Meridian actually stands for. Patricia's eyes were red. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. She looked at Vanessa for a long time. I'll stay, she said. Her voice was hoarse. I'll do the work. Then we start Monday. The weekend unfolded quietly after that. Vanessa and Derek did celebrate their anniversary. They had dinner at Copper and Vine. The seared duck breast was excellent. The sommelier's Willamette Valley Pinot Noir pairing was inspired, and the creme brulee was, as Derek put it, unreasonably good. They slept late on Saturday. They hiked a portion of the Blue Ridge Trail behind the property. They sat in the spa's thermal pool and talked about their daughter Amara's college applications and whether the kitchen renovation at home would really be done by Thanksgiving, which they both knew it wouldn't be. They were, for 48 hours, just a couple on their anniversary. On Saturday afternoon, sitting on the balcony of their suite overlooking the Blue Ridge foothills, Derek asked the question he'd been holding since Friday night. You could have fired her on the spot. Every employment lawyer in the country would have backed you. Why didn't you? Vanessa turned her wine glass slowly. The late afternoon sun caught the Chardonnay and turned it the color of amber. Because I've fired people before. It feels righteous for about a day. Then the property hires someone new. The new person has the same blind spots because the system that produced them hasn't changed. And 6 months later, I'm reading another complaint from another Dr. Ossie. She took a sip. Firing solves the symptom. I'm trying to treat the disease. And if she doesn't change? Then I fire her in 6 months with a documented record that makes the reason undeniable. But at least I'll know I gave her the chance. And more importantly, the staff will know. They'll know that Meridian doesn't just punish bad behavior. It invests in better behavior. That matters for the 2,600 people who work for me, Derek. It matters for the culture. Derek studied his wife. This woman who had once scrubbed hotel bathrooms and who now made decisions that affected thousands of lives with the same careful attention she'd given to those rooms in Richmond. After 15 years, she still surprised him. "You're a better person than I am, Ness." "No, I'm a more strategic person than you are. There's a difference." She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. But underneath the weekend, the machinery of change had already begun to turn. Ellis, the front desk associate, submitted a formal written statement about the 2 previous incidents he'd witnessed. It was detailed, specific, and brave. The kind of documentation that HR departments rarely receive, because most employees are too afraid of retaliation to provide it. Deborah, the concierge, followed suit with her own observations, spanning nearly 2 years of small patterns she had noticed but never felt empowered to report. The way certain guests were directed to the lounge while their payment processed, and others were not. The way the valet team was subtly faster with some cars than others. The way the restaurant host occasionally seated parties of color near the kitchen corridor rather than by the windows. None of it was dramatic. None of it made headlines. It was the quiet architecture of exclusion, the kind built not from hatred, but from assumptions so deeply embedded that the people enacting them genuinely didn't see what they were doing. Vanessa read every statement. She saved each one in a secure file that would inform the audit. On Sunday morning, before checkout, Gerald Ashby found her in the lobby. "Mrs. Caldwell." He extended his hand. His grip was firm, his eyes steady behind horn-rimmed glasses. "Gerald Ashby, retired, 4th Circuit Court of Appeals." "Judge Ashby, I know your name. Your ruling in Henderson versus Commonwealth is still taught in hospitality law courses." His eyebrows rose. "You've read my opinions?" "I've read every court ruling that relates to discrimination in public accommodations. It's relevant to my business." She smiled. "And to my life." He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "What you did Friday night, choosing reform over retribution, that takes a particular kind of strength. Most people, when they hold the power you hold, use it to punish. You used it to build. That's rare." "Punishment is easy," Vanessa said. "It's satisfying for about 15 minutes. Then the next person does the same thing because the system that produced the behavior hasn't changed. I'm not interested in 15 minutes of satisfaction. I'm interested in 23 hotels where no one has to prove they belong. If you're still watching, stay with me, because what Vanessa set in motion didn't just change one hotel. It changed an entire industry's conversation about who gets welcomed and who gets questioned. The Meridian Open Door Initiative launched formally in January. The independent audit of the Ashford property took 11 weeks and produced a 94-page report. Its findings were uncomfortable but not surprising. Differential treatment patterns were present in check-in, dining, and spa services, concentrated primarily during evening and weekend shifts when senior management was most visible, suggesting that the behavior was modeled from the top down. Vanessa released a summary of the findings to all 23 property GMs in a confidential briefing. She did not name the Ashford property specifically, but she made clear that the audit had been triggered by a real incident and that every property would be subject to the same scrutiny. The training program was developed in partnership with Dr. Keisha Holt, an organizational psychologist from Howard University, who specialized in institutional bias in service industries. It wasn't a one-day seminar with a PowerPoint and a certificate. It was a 12-week program with scenario-based workshops, recorded role plays reviewed with facilitators, and anonymous peer feedback mechanisms. Staff were compensated for every hour of training at their standard rate. Vanessa had insisted on this. "If we ask people to do the work of changing a culture," she told her CFO, "we pay them for that work." The total cost of the Open Door pilot program at the Ashford property was $218,000. Vanessa approved it without hesitation. It was, she noted, less than the potential liability of a single discrimination lawsuit, and infinitely more productive. Patricia Langford attended every session. The staff who worked with her during those months reported a change that was gradual but unmistakable. She began asking questions she had never asked before, not managerial questions about metrics and timelines, but human questions. She asked Ellis what it felt like to watch a check-in go wrong and not be able to intervene. She asked Deborah whether the concierge team had ever felt pressured to treat guests differently based on appearance. She asked the housekeeping supervisor, a Guatemalan woman named Rosa Gutierrez, who had worked at the property for 9 years, whether Rosa had ever felt that the leadership saw her. Rosa, who had never been asked this question by any manager in 9 years, cried. Patricia cried too. It would be dishonest to say that Patricia Langford transformed overnight into a different person. She didn't. Bias that has been absorbed over a lifetime does not dissolve in 12 weeks of training. There were moments of defensiveness, moments where she reverted to old patterns and had to be redirected, moments where she sat in her office after a workshop session and stared at the wall, reckoning with the distance between who she believed herself to be and what the evidence showed she had done. But she stayed. She did the work. And 6 months later, when Vanessa returned to the Ashford property for Patricia's probationary review, the numbers told a story of their own. Staff turnover had dropped from 31% to 14%. Guest satisfaction scores had risen from 87.3 to 93.1. The property had received 0 discrimination complaints in 6 months, down from 3 the previous year. And the anonymous employee engagement survey showed a 27-point increase in the question, "I feel that all guests are treated equally at this property." Vanessa sat across from Patricia in the same private dining room where she delivered her ultimatum 6 months earlier. "The numbers are strong," Vanessa said. "The numbers are better," Patricia corrected quietly. "They're not where they need to be yet." Vanessa regarded her for a long moment. Then she nodded. "That's the right answer." On a Tuesday evening in March, 8 months after the incident in the lobby, Dr. Warren Osei checked into the Meridian Grand Ashford for the second time. He had accepted Vanessa's invitation cautiously. A man who had been humiliated at a hotel does not rush back to the scene. But Vanessa's call had been direct, her apology specific and unequivocal, and her description of the changes being implemented had been concrete enough to earn his curiosity, if not yet his trust. He arrived at 6:15 p.m. He was wearing scrubs under a bomber jacket. He'd come straight from the hospital. No designer labels, no status markers, just a tired cardiologist with a rolling bag. Ellis was at the front desk. "Dr. Osei, welcome back." Ellis smiled, the kind of smile that carried weight because it carried memory. "Your suite is ready. We've noted your preference for a high floor and extra pillows, and the restaurant has your table by the window reserved for 7 o'clock. Warren Osei stood at the counter for a moment longer than necessary. Not because anything was wrong, because everything was right. Because the welcome was immediate and unconditional, and the same welcome he would have received if he'd been wearing a tailored suit and a Rolex. He thought about the last time he'd stood here, 20 months earlier, when a different person at this desk had studied his hospital ID badge as though it might be forged, had asked him twice if he was sure about the suite rate, had made him feel, in the space of 5 minutes, like an intruder in a building he'd paid to enter. He remembered the heat in his chest that night, The way he'd sat on the edge of the hotel bed afterward and stared at the ceiling, wondering whether it was worth writing the review, wondering whether anyone who mattered would ever read it. Someone had read it. The person who mattered most had read it. "Thank you, Ellis," he said. "Of course, Dr. Osei. Happy to have you with us." As Warren walked toward the elevator, Patricia Langford was crossing the lobby from the opposite direction, returning from a facilities walkthrough. Their paths intersected near the concierge desk. Patricia recognized him. She had studied his file, his complaint, his review during the audit process. She had read his words over and over until they stopped feeling like an accusation and started feeling like a mirror. She stopped. He stopped. "Dr. Osei." Her voice was steady, but there was a weight behind it, the weight of someone who has done genuine inventory and knows exactly what they owe. "Welcome back. I'm Patricia Langford, the general manager. I owe you an apology, not a corporate one, a personal one. What happened during your first day was wrong, and I'm sorry." Warren studied her face for a long moment. He'd performed enough surgeries to know what sincerity looked like. It lived in the eyes, not the words. "I appreciate that," he said. "Truly." Patricia nodded once, then continued across the lobby. No performance, no lingering. Just accountability, delivered simply and received simply, in a hotel lobby on a Tuesday evening in March. As Warren walked toward the elevator, he passed the lobby's marble floor. The crack in the tile, the one Vanessa had spotted on the night that started everything, had been repaired. The new tile was seamless. You'd never know it had been broken. But Vanessa would know. She always noticed. The Open Door Initiative expanded to all 23 Meridian properties by the end of that year. Within 18 months, the program's framework was licensed by 2 other boutique hotel chains and cited in a Harvard Business Review case study on institutional bias in luxury hospitality. Patricia Langford remained as general manager of the Meridian Grand Ashford. She was never the same manager she had been, which was the point. At a hospitality conference in Atlanta, she was asked to speak on a panel about equity in guest services. She told the audience, in a voice that shook only slightly, about the night she had denied a room to the woman who owned the building she stood in, and about the choice that woman had given her. "She could have destroyed my career in 5 minutes," Patricia said. "Instead, she gave me the chance to earn it back. I'm still earning it." Gerald Ashby, the retired judge, wrote Vanessa a letter after his next stay at the Ashford. It was handwritten on cream stationery, and it said, in part, "I have spent my career adjudicating justice after the fact. What you have done is rarer and harder. You have built justice into the architecture of a living institution. The law punishes. Leadership transforms." Vanessa kept the letter in her office, not framed, just tucked into a drawer where she could find it on the days when the work felt too slow or too heavy, because the work was slow. And it was heavy, and it was never finished. But every time a guest walked through the revolving door of any Meridian hotel, any guest in any clothes, with any card, from any background, and was met with a welcome that didn't waver, didn't hesitate, didn't calculate their worth based on what they looked like. That was the point. That was always the point. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think about the doors that open easily for some and not for others, consider subscribing to Justice Tales. We bring you stories like this every week, not because the world is fair, but because stories have the power to show us what fairness could look like.